Here was evidence that Europe, long touted as our salvation, was dangerous to our economy as well as to our independence.
As the weeks went by, new faces appeared, people I'd never thought of as being Eurosceptic, but they were all moving in that direction, and not least because they were wanting to put down a marker that they didn't really be happy about John Major's leadership.
Seeing Major in trouble, the sceptics pounced at that autumn's Tory conference. Norman Tebbit turned on Major and ignited the rebellion against Maastricht, still not ratified.
Do you want to be citizens of a European Union? Let's launch the drive for Maastricht II, a treaty with no mention of more power for Brussels, no mention of economic and monetary and political union. It's a task in which I stand ready to join John Major whenever he is ready to begin.
I thought I might be able to save the government from itself. I used to style myself in those days the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, in the sense that this was a treaty which I saw as being fundamentally bad for Britain, and that within it there were a whole load of hooks on which new policies would be set in place.
As Major enjoyed the approval and friendship of other EU leaders abroad, he made enemies at home with his ruthless crushing of the Tory sceptics. 9 days after Maastricht passed, Major blurted out his true feelings about those who had opposed him.
You want to start this on a wide two-shot with...
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, okay.
But where do you think most of this poison has come from? It's come from the dispossessed and the never possessed. You and I can both think that ex-ministers are going around causing all sorts of trouble. We want 3 more of the bastards out there.
There was an ambiguity because there were 4 Eurosceptics in the cabinet, and his remark was, I don't want another 3 of the bastards out there, in reply to why didn't he sack the Eurosceptics. So there was always debate between the 4 as to which of us had been left out and not been described as a bastard.
So I rang up number 10 and I said, I hear that the Prime Minister has called me a bastard. I assume this is false. Can I go and deny it? No, you can't. So I said, well, if it's not false, it would be very helpful to have a line to take, which is what it's called in the trade, which means this is what you have to say, because this is what the Cabinet believes. Can I have the line to take on whether I am or am not a bastard? The answer came back, there isn't one.
The unofficial line was that the sceptics were bastards, and nasty bastards at that, but obviously not nasty or effective enough. For in the end, they, and their Bruges Group allies, had failed to influence policy. So many of them concluded that the Tory party was not their friend, but their foe.
I became more and more convinced the Bruges Group itself was lacking the weight to pressurize the government into doing anything very radical, especially after the government's insistence that Maastricht be pressed through.
Sked set up the Anti-Federalist League and stood in the '92 election. A year later, while still lecturing at the London School of Economics, he started the UK Independence Party.
I had picked up a number of supporters. It looked as if there was every chance we could set up a new party. So there was a meeting at LSE one weekend. We decided to call it the UK Independence Party. The main reaction wasn't so much that the policy was ridiculous. The main reaction was that it's impossible for a new party to actually overturn the two-party monopoly, and that it was a wasted vote. I mean, that was what we came up against.
The divisions in Conservative ranks hadn't gone away because Maastricht was ratified or because some sceptics had defected. Far from it. There was now a civil war as bad as Labour's had been 20 years before. Disastrously for the Tories, this split became the dominant political story of the time, though it didn't shift policy.
The subject of Europe was so painful that on the whole the Cabinet didn't talk about it. That may strike you as extremely surprising, but actually during many of these painful months and years, the subject did not appear on the cabinet agenda.
Why doesn't he stand aside and make way for somebody else who can provide the party and the country with direction and leadership?
Major is coming. Are you recording? Major's coming. I've lost all sound. Are you?
In a foredoomed effort to end the conflict, Major resigned and challenged his foes to stand against him.
I am not prepared to see the party I care for laid out on the rack like this for any longer. In short, it is time to put up or shut up.
John Redwood alone dared to do so. His bizarre campaign made the sceptic cause once again look eccentric and freakish.
I came into House of Commons, I talked to a few friends and just said, what should I do now? And they said, well, you should run for the leadership. And I said, well, have I got any support? And they said, yes, we'll support you.
Your decision to resign leaves our party in limbo when it needs firm but understanding leadership. It makes a contest inevitable.
The supposed Eurosceptic heavyweights decided this was not the right time.
And told him I would...
Redwood, himself a considerable intellect and a serious man, was left with a platform packed with Tory cranks and outsiders, and his bid failed. But the Tory government still had 2 miserable years of splits and squabbles ahead. Defeated inside the party, many sceptics now looked elsewhere for salvation.
And those of our members who would have been...
James Goldsmith was a very exotic player in this particular drama. I think he tried to widen the sceptic case by making it to do with the referendum rather than what you thought should be the ambitions and the limits of European power.
Jimmy Goldsmith was a good thing insofar as the referendum party secured a promise from the Conservatives that on the euro there would be a referendum, and that was later endorsed by Tony Blair. He was a negative factor insofar as he gave the Eurosceptic movement the idea that the only way forward was to depend on multimillionaires and billionaires.
Even a multi-billionaire couldn't have saved the Tories in May 1997. Much of Labour's campaign had been phony, including this staged welcome, but the Tories had paid the price for fooling the country and themselves about what Europe meant. Edward Heath concealed the ultimate aim of the European project. Margaret Thatcher discovered far too late that it was impossible to be a patriotic Tory and a Europhile. Despite the opt-outs he had negotiated, John Major had ended up taking Britain far deeper into the European superstate than anyone had expected. And the civil war he launched against his opponents brought about the virtual ruin of the Tory party. Labour ought to have been the sceptic's nightmare. Anthony Blair claimed to be a keen Brussels enthusiast, and his party, once pledged to leave, were now pledged to go in as deeply as they could. But it wasn't quite so simple.
The high watermark for pro-European thinking within the Labour Party was actually the election day of 1997. New Labour was specifically a reaction to the policy positions held in '83. It therefore became axiomatic that a new modernised Labour Party had to be pro-European, compared to put distance between that and the old anti-European party circa 1983.
Its own sceptics powerless, Labour threw away Major's opt-out from the Maastricht Social Chapter Protocol.